Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all tribes of the earth will wail on account of him. Even so, Amen. My mission and vision for this channel is politics through a scientific lens and entertainment. The mission would be extinction prevention from nuclear war, AI, and ourselves. This Sunday, I will talk basics about systems and systems thinking, terror and war of Middle East, and good and bad environments. Starting with the obvious, my face cover is not for anonymity, but for a platform of pure information without the personality circus around it. Buddha's ideas of non-self point towards this personality circus that is destructive towards constructive dialogue with your own self and others. Probably Mohammed had the same idea of creating a medium of communication of pure information without a personality circus, which at some point was intentionally reframed as a command that should hinder and punish any critique towards the Prophet. And how this insanity came to be is the very pattern of self-destructiveness in the religion of Islam. This is a good starting point for explaining some basics about systems and environments and how these environments affect its constituents. Systematically speaking, any whole system can be categorized into two categories: open and closed systems. Open meaning the system and its parts is not confined to its whole. Rather, it allows interaction with the environment and allows an inflow and outflow of information. Take, for example, your smartphone, how it is a system with clear borders and with systems within the borders that have some particular functions. Although it looks quite closed and bordered as a system, it isn't a closed system because it interacts with the environment, you in this case, and you are able to input and get output information from your smartphone. So by contrast to this open system, your phone, you can imagine a system that is completely closed and doesn't interact with the environment. Fundamentally, in nature or objective reality, closed systems don't exist. So as everything interacts with everything, but in a subjective reality, at the foot of at our boundless individual and collective imagination, closed systems become and are a reality. Simply put, systems can be either radically open or radically closed, and at the same time, systems can be on a scale like partially opened or partially closed. By definition, an open system that allows interaction with the environment is an alive system that is able to evolve or devolve its whole system by interacting with the environment or the natural world. A radically closed system or a system that barely leaves room for interaction with the environment is a system that by definition is dead and doesn't change within this system at all, or barely changes at an extremely low rate of change of or evolution. So gods or religions are nothing but systems that have its particular functions and ideas within the system of what the contents and laws of the natural objective and subjective world are. In other words, religions and its gods are just a set of ideas about the natural world, uh, if you think about it in terms of systems. Now, as mentioned before, some systems are more or less open closed, or totally open or totally closed. Islam as a religion is a radically closed system that does not allow its natural evolution trend to unfold. Christianity as a religion used to be at the same radically closed state where its constituents and dissent, dissenters were persecuted. But at some point in time, after the Renaissance, Christianity started to open up as a collective religious thinking system, and slowly families and individuals within the system were able to exert individuality and interaction with the environment and other systems, with other information, uh, which automatically means when a system is open to a degree to the environment, it allows itself and its constituents to evolve. And this gradual evolution of the whole and the parts of the Western enterprise led to a group of societies today preaching and observing individual rights. On contrary, the Orthodox Christian religion, which operates as a closed system in the same manner that Islam operates, is in a similar position of systematic failure and non-change. And this failure is not simply just a failure, it translates to devastating effects for its constituents and surroundings, creating a closed society that operates exclusively by fear and control, as that is the only way to maintain a closed fixed system and the only way to erase creativity from a society or group in order to protect the fixed system. It is no wonder why the region of these systems inhabit are in a constant struggle, be it political, economic, or societal. Simply put, systems that citizens inhabit that are open are by definition systems that allow the existence of creativity from within the system and without of the system. In contrast, radically closed systems or super closed systems that don't allow interaction with the natural world or other systems within the natural world, by definition, don't change or evolve within and without. Such closed systems are dead systems that don't allow natural evolution and operate exclusively within a closed loop of non-change. I will go back to the beginning of this conversation where I mentioned why I am covering my face and how Muhammad probably had the same idea of how it's important that concrete ideas are discussed instead of identities and carriers of ideas. In order to emphasize that ideas and systems of ideas are primary when it comes to solving issues that arise uh, from real problems or deceit, false ideas, or simply systems of bad ideas. This idea was distorted within the closed of Islam to a degree that the teachings of Muhammad are put in a closed, monopolistic cage where interpretation and evolution of his teachings is controlled, distorted, and hindered, which is tragic to say the least. By contrast, Jesus and his teachings have been definitely controlled, distorted, and abused or misused in a similar manner until not so long ago. But the difference between Jesus' and Muhammad's work is that the sheer piercing truth of Jesus is almost unmanipulable. So Muhammad and his teachings have been super controlled to a demonic degree, which by definition means that the teachings could have been easily distorted based on need and interest, the controlling. Instead of teachings being a well of information, discussion and exchange and interaction and interpretation, instead the Muslim community itself is barred from the true, personally interpretable richness of its own prophet or religion. As a result, as a human that was born in a imperialistic Muslim country, I literally have no idea or any detailed information about Muhammad other than super basic knowledge. Simply put, because of the thought and idea police of Islam, that it blocks its own constituents of freely thinking, freely freely feeling, freely interpreting, is another example of why it's a closed and controlled and corrupted system that is ultimately self-destructive. So instead of the teachings and work of Muhammad being free and accessible by Muslims and non-Muslims, which is what Muhammad himself preached for, I believe, a medium of exchange of ideas and interpretations instead of blind personality, reverence, and obedience, which is why his face and probably why he himself asked for his face to be covered and not portrayed. So instead of his teachings being free and open because of Islamic demonic control, you will be persecuted and killed for contemplating ideas around the Prophet, and he is held in a blind obedience, reverence, and devotion position, the exact opposite what was originally intended by himself. So to put it in extremely simple words, Muhammad was interested that the main focus should be his work and the teachings and not his personality, because he simply knew that his ideas will lose meaning because of people's tendency to follow personalities blindly. Personalities, kings, or whatever authority present at that time. The absolute truth is that the demonic control of his ancestors almost literally killed their own prophet and his work in the same manner that its constituents are terrorized and killed by control and terror. As above, so below. This leads to another topic, which is the thought and idea police, which is another tool that is used within systems to persecute creativity and order obedience and absolute conformity. Let's take, for example, two companies led by two families. Uh, one company sells shoes, the other company sells soft drinks. The shoe company has a culture and policy of openness and looks for talent beyond its family or close ties. The soft drink company is a closed company that only recruits its own family members and close associates based on pure self-interest. And yeah, let's say in this example, 100 years have passed since these two companies started operating. And I hope you can guess by now which company will be more creative, profitable, and simply which company has more chances of being a successful, useful, and ethical company in its craft. The more time goes by, the more the shoe company will be able to be creative and adapt to the flow of time and evolution of its industry. By contrast, the soft drink company, by not being able to be creative due to a control and thought police culture, by definition, even if its constituents are super creative, will be behind the shoe company in terms of creativity or offering a quality product that survives the changes and evolution of its environment. With this closed strategy of operating, the soft drink company eventually will fail, and by definition will eventually resort to deceit, cutting corners, deceiving the consumers, compet competition sabotage, employee deceit, mistreatment, and low payment. And all sorts of tools and techniques are used as a trade-off when creativity is absolutely hindered by the close, controlling, and thought police company culture. So with this example, one can clearly see that even for a company, openness is fundamental. Otherwise, you will fall behind the rate of evolution of the industry or economy that you partake. You can as well clearly see how a closed system, even in a company, creates a culture of deceit and plundering, where there is barely any creativity because of the thought and idea police culture, with its function to keep the company operating with its fixed tradition and continuing its tradition, while other open companies freely improve and evolve. The competition gets ahead easily, and all that's left for closed system companies to do is start plundering its competitors' ideas, plundering and deceit of its own workers and its own consumers. Uh, in companies, the thought and idea police does not physically harm its constituents, but violence, fear perpetrated by the thought and idea police of religions, governments, cults as a main tool for control is the very tool that is responsible for enormous persecution and death. These topics leads us to another system categories, which are aggressive and defensive systems. You can think of aggressive systems in terms of uh, uh, organisms or animals. For example, a tiger has a systematically aggressive operating approach, whereas a turtle has a defensive systematic strategy for its survival. Besides animals, ideas or systems of ideas can be aggressive or defensive. Let's take, for example, the idea of global warming. At face value, it's just a theory that our planet's atmospheric gas recycling system is in disbalance due to artificially human-created gas emissions, which is by definition true, but this truth can be twisted in various ways to make the concept of global warming an aggressive or defensive system of operating and approach to a problem. On one hand, it can be made aggressive, where the truth of industrial atmospheric gas injection will be catastrophical, will have catastrophical consequences for our planets, for our planet, and an aggressive alarmism is enveloped around the idea of global warming to aggressively push solutions towards something we don't clearly understand. So once again, I'll repeat. On one hand, it can be made aggressive, where the truth of industrial atmospheric artificial gas injection will have catastrophical consequences for our planet, and an aggressive alarmism is enveloped around the idea of global warming to aggressively push solutions towards something we don't clearly understand. And uh, on the other hand, a defensive approach would be to continue developing research capabilities and provide more accurate models and parallel to the research findings and model sophistications, provide contemporary solutions. With this example, I want to point out that basically any idea or group of ideas can be made or transformed into an aggressive or defensive system of ideas. Even evidently good ideas can be turned upside down into an aggressive system that fundamentally produces negative consequences, even if the first principles of the system were positive or good. After the war in Kosovo, when I restarted my primary school around the year 2000, when I went back to Kosovo from being an war immigrant, right after the war, and for a long time, the environment in my primary school, inside and outside in the schoolyard, dramatically shifted into a terror aggressive environment, or what I would call a kingdom of hell environment. Simply put, an environment riddled with control, fear, violence, terror, and uncertainty. The school itself took zero responsibility, and the only powers that caused nothing but terror and fear were the gangs uh, that formed around the that formed from the non-institutionally responsible vacuum that was present. Fights happening left and right, teachers being aggressed and attacked, stealing students, bullying students, and literally no one could do anything about it. So the only option would be to align with the hell environment and its devious rules. Otherwise, you get swallowed by terror. Now, after mentioning some super basic information about systems, I can elaborate the current political theater of the world and the terror of the Islamic and the Orthodox religions and governments. Islam and Orthodox religions and governments like communistic systems operate in a radically closed or super closed system of operating and governance. Let's take, for example, Iran and Serbia. Superficially, these two systems don't look similar, but at its core, they are the same systematic closed system that produces persecution, aggression, violence within and without its borders, deceit, and in general, a society that is led by fear and deceit. In such societies, opposition exists only superficially, as the terror of fear and control doesn't even allow for an environment that enables proper or truthful opposition. So not only does a system like this persecute and kill, but it actively destroys environments for such opposition to exist in the first place. For example, if you plant tomato seeds in a field where there is no accessible water or quality soil or nutrition or proper care, there will be no tomatoes. So the environment gets disrupted in such a way that, uh, let's say, opposition tomatoes cannot even grow in such terror environments of control and fear. So this is just some form of controlled opposition. And at the other side, the thought police operates in both societies. In Iran, it blatantly persecutes and kills its dissidents, and in Serbia, it blatantly persecutes and demonizes to a degree that dissidents' character is assassinated institutionally. So the main difference being that Serbia has a more sophisticated technique of killing or squashing this dissent through its professional terror network that possesses institutions, governments, corporations, etc. For example, Serbia, by having influence over Kosovar individuals, politics, and institutions that operate on the same network of a closed, violent, systematic governance, can squash dissent in Kosovo outside the borders of Serbia. And in the very same manner, Iran and the Muslim terror can do the same, reach out of its borders and continue their terror of dissent almost globally with its thought and idea police. And there are numerous facts about this. For example, a French artist, just for drawing the prophet in a particular way, was literally killed, and this is one of 1,000 such examples of terror and thought police slowly seeping in the Western and societal and political enterprise. I would like to invite you to use your imagination right now and understand a simple simulation that I will present to you. Imagine a game similar to Space Invaders, but with a twist. If you haven't seen or heard of it, it's an extremely old and simple game. Basically, there are two types of objects in the game. There are the Space Invaders, aliens, that have the ability to shoot, and there are the players that can defend and shoot against the space invaders. Now in the normal game, the defending player has the ability to shoot as well as the invaders. But for this simulation, we change the roles and we take out the defensive player's ability to shoot. So the game is set up in such a way that space invaders are the only object or player that can be aggressive and shoot down other players. On the other hand, the defensive player ability is only defensive maneuver with no aggressive shooting or converting ability. So this simulation is almost the exact situation and conditions that the Western political, religious, and societal theater is operating on. On one hand, you have the open and defensive Western system of governance, religious and societal freedom. On the other hand, an aggressive horde of closed and aggressive system of governance, religion, and societal being. Islam and Orthodox religions and terror communist governments, by definition, are closed and aggressive systems that continually repress and aggress its own constituents to align, and more importantly, push that forced alignment to other nations, trying to aggressively convert and maintain within and outside its borders. Now, for the first time, I've mentioned forced alignment, and I guess you can imagine what it means. Whereas the Western free governance and religious enterprise heavily leans towards a non-forced or free alignment. So, on one hand, you have a forced, aggressive, destructive alignment, and on the other side, a defensive, constructive, individualistically free alignment. Now we go back to the simulation, just as in the game. A horde of mainly Islamic and Orthodox migrants are being shoved upon the Western body politics and society. So, in other words, the Western democratic and free, open oriented style that provides opportunities for free alignment at the other side, and at the other side, a horde of forced alignment, way of governance, religion, and society is pouring in. So, by definition, you can see that it's a situation like trying to combine oil and water. So there's the space invaders with forced alignment that are by definition aggressive in their craft, with an aggressive alignment approach from the collective religious and government powers that be up until the individual. The same aggressive strategy is perpetrated. And in this situation, it's aptly represented by the space invaders as the only object layer that has the aggressive ability to shoot and convert other people to other religions and ways of thinking. On the other hand, the defensive Western free alignment player has no ability and tendency to aggressively attempt to convert individuals to Christianity, to convert individuals to Christianity, or simply convert to a free democratic society. And again, in this simulation, it's perfectly represented with the defending player, which has no ability to shoot down and convert the space invaders into a free-oriented individual. So by definition, with this very accurate simulation, no matter how much time goes by, in fact, the more time goes by, statistically speaking, the space invaders have a billion more chances of converting the defenders to Islam and Orthodoxy, and simply a bad way of governance. And on the other side, the passive and neutral defensive Western player, with its freedom-oriented approach, by definition, has almost no chance of converting an ideologically aggressive invader into a normal, freedom-oriented citizen. Simply put, the Western player has been put in an unwinnable situation. In other plain words, Christianity and its offspring of a freedom-oriented society, with time, if variables don't change, will succumb to the aggressive radical ideologies that exist within and without. Islam and Orthodoxy have an unmatched partner in the Western political enterprise, and that is the old powers that be that used to operate in the same aggressive, systematic manner, and that partner is within Western institutions, where slowly a thought and idea police is being normalized in the West. And that is one of the signs of Western free alignment deviation towards forced alignment. Another sign is what I would call the professional terror and persecution enterprise, and what Serbia and other ex-communist states are extremely sophisticated at, and some Western countries. And they are sophisticated at abusing governmental institutions for power and forced alignment of dissidents, and that is almost no different from the Islamic forced alignment. So the West is being shoved with a super overtly aggressive Islamic doctrine and ideology, and covertly by the orthodox, communist, closed and subversive, aggressive, systematic governmental doctrine and ideology. I can show you the endgame of these two waves of terror very easily by taking Kosovo as an example. Kosovo is the perfect example of how these two waves of terror affect a country. The Islamic Ottoman imperialistic terror shoved in the Albanian population for more than 500 years, with an aggressive systematic terror that was even worse than. You can imagine how the thought and idea police for 500 years completely erased dissent, or the very idea of dissent or critique was completely removed, just as what is happening right now in the West, with terror, death threats, and killings by Islamic terror in the West is not just some tragic loss of people's life. It's a systematic oppression with the sole function and goal to remove any dissent or critique on a global level, setting up the grounds for a global ideological invasion. Parallel to this wave of terror, the Orthodox communist wave of terror in Kosovo before the war had already most of its people installed within Kosovar institutions by the Yugoslav communist country. And naturally, after the war, the majority of the institutional roles were occupied by the networks of these two waves of terror. And before and after the war, institutionally and systematically, the Kosovar Albanian citizen was constantly being terrorized through terror institutions. The two waves of completely occupied the two waves of terror completely occupied the entire justice system, the public and administration system, the educational system, and many other institutional and private spheres of influence. This aggressive and professional institutional invasion and its effects are still felt enormously in the Kosovar society today, where basic institutions like the justice system and the education system operate as a closed, aggressive system that completely works on nepotism and clientelism. In short summary, on one hand, the Albanian population was objectively invaded through sheer terror and violence, and on the other hand, it was subjectively, institutionally, and ideologically being invaded, and especially in core institutions and tools that are supposed to maintain a free society, such as the justice system and the education system. Both these democratic institutional systems have been terrorized and occupied to a point that there was and is literally barely any progress in these institutions for 20 years after the war. Today, in the year 2026, the Iranian fanatically religious state and its terror network has completely enslaved its population in a radically closed, aggressive system of religious governance, and that is not their only goal. In that closed and aggressive society that is bound in a closed loop of terror and aggression, the only tragic realization that you should have is that there are literal millions of women being groomed, enslaved, terrorized, trafficked, and barred from basic human rights. So, simply put, in a closed patriarchal and religious society like that, woman and woman's freedom doesn't exist. My grandmother used to tell me stories how no more than 40 years ago in her village, it was a norm for women to be kidnapped forcefully by Muslim Ottoman forces or their representatives. So how uh, you can imagine how women are treated in a closed patriarchal society like that, like literal cattle that are trafficked and kidnapped based on male interest and needs. And without a shred of doubt, the Iranian society and its network is the main catalyst for global female human trafficking and the enabling and reasoning of it. So I have a simple question for the situation where are the performative feminists in today's world? Like actually, where are the performative feminists in today's world? Ironically, they are protesting for terrorists. That's where they are. I would like to briefly talk about Islam and how its customs have a two-dimensional meaning, a normal religious and a military dimension. For example, the custom of having up to four wives, which is not surprising pimp behavior. And you can guess what pimps do with women, as I mentioned before. Uh, this custom has two dimensions. On one side, it can be a simple custom that is based on male priority. And on the other side, it can be an enormously effective military tool of invasion and enabling of coupling with the invaded population's women in order to replace the population. So imagine 100, 200 years ago, an Islamic soldier has one wife at home and in his country and goes on a invasion campaign and impregnates three other women legally in three other invaded countries in order to exert control. Another custom that has a military dimension in it would be the fasting customs in the Islamic tradition. On one side, it can be a normal tradition of fasting and general healthy yearly habits, and on the other side, militarily speaking, it can be an extremely effective tool for organizing dieting eating during invasions. An army that has a learned diet of eating only early mornings and late evenings can devastate other armies that have a disorganized eating and resting diet. The custom of alcohol prohibition is the same. On one side, it's generally a healthy prohibition with a lot of positive effects, but on the other side, its main function was and is its military side, as it was a perfect custom to keep the army from getting drunk. And armies during those periods were plagued with drinking problems, which automatically translates to worse soldiers. So, simply put, Islam has two dimensions. One, a normal religious dimension, which is always a minority in Muslim societies, and the military dimension, which is almost a majority in Muslim societies. Now, I don't know if Muhammad was a military genius or today's Western security apparatus and body politics is regressing to a point of catatonic ineffectiveness. I think both things are true, and I'm dumbfounded why it's the year 2026 and the Western politics body does not recognize the fact that at the very least an ideological invasion is taking place. By the mere fact that a heavily military religious country like Iran exists as a broadcaster of death and destruction, control and fear towards the West, which automatically means that any Muslim individual in the West can be the receiver and actualizer of the broadcast of death, of, of, of the broadcast of death and destruction that is perpetrated by Iran. Simply put, Iran is the broadcasting radio station, and every existing Muslim in the world is the antenna receiver. By definition, these variables and conditions mean that as long as a military religious state like Iran exists that broadcasts death and destruction, any Muslim in the West has the potential to be converted into a soldier of terror. And for a long time, this has been happening in the Western political and societal theater. Endless terror attacks, endless political attacks, endless ideological aggression, endless fear, endless pushing of terror and fear. And with experience, I will say that not only European borders are open, to this ideological militaristic invasion, but in the asylum procedure in the Netherlands, I encountered an environment and reception exactly the same as the environment in my primary school after war. An environment of theft, constant fights, general violent environment, gangs left and right, institutional terror and irresponsibility. You can imagine who runs asylum centers like that if institutions are negligent and not so cooperative. Imagine you're escaping this terror for a better environment and a better state and a better life simply, and you end up in an asylum center environment exactly like the terror you escaped from, maybe even worse. Islamic and Orthodox and communist terror has massive influence in these institutions. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like that. So not only European borders are open to literal any criminal, rapist, or gangs, but the asylum procedure is processed by the very terror network or influenced by the very terror network that you are running from. And its alignment priorities are towards terror forced alignment. The European bureaucratic terror that longs for power in the same manner that militaristic Islamist states do and the Orthodox states do, have created an open border or asylum immigration that does not discriminate, which is the exact opposite of what its function is and should be. It should discriminate. It should heavily discriminate between, at least between terror and normal people, but it doesn't since it needs naive voters, which with enough time could become terror soldiers overnight. 47 years ago, Iran was a much freer society, and just overnight, just uh, just with an eye blink, a death cult from India and a death cult from the Middle East completely invaded a secular society of Iran, and you can imagine the terror and aggression inflicted upon the society itself at that time, 47 years ago, which is not so different from now. Today, the world is blind to realize that a terror religious state that massacres its own citizens, that enables and pushes female trafficking, that terrorizes the world beyond its borders, that screams for death and destruction towards US and Israel, which is just a synonym for the destruction of the Western world or the destruction of a freedom aligned Western world, and more importantly, realize the extent to which this terror and its terror network have occupied Western institutions and political theaters, with help from their terror network states in Middle East, Balkans, Europe, and beyond, which now are defending a literal theocratic military religious state that massacred its own people in January not so long ago. As always, the world is in a battle of good and evil, and as I see it, the situation in the Middle East is not being understood fully. It is either the entire world gathers around for a diplomatic political push of surrender and deep change of the militaristic Islam terror governance, or there will be war. Simple. It's simply put, it's the collective choice of this planet that will push for a diplomatic, peaceful solution or a choice of war. Because of the professional terror campaign of evil, collective global truth is watered down, manipulated, and changed to a degree that distorts reality to levels that real issues cannot be identified or solved. So the entire planet is engulfed in these muddy waters of deceit, manipulation, insecurity, terror, and general instability. The kingdom of hell environment that we have created, if it is met by an alien super intelligence that is right around the corner, it will just conform to this environment and start playing the terror game of violence and deceit. And this planet, it will start playing the terror game of violence and deceit that this planet likes to play so much. And the end game of that is just the annihilation of human life. As I mentioned in previous essays, either this planet switches into a kingdom of heaven environment where free alignment is the core principle of being, contrary to today's kingdom of hell, where forced alignment is the core principle behind the majority of systems that inhabit this planet with its hell, with its hell environment of constant wars, violence, deceit, manipulation, and general disease. A world which is inhabited by a kingdom of heaven is simply a world where the majority of individuals of the planet collectively decide and religiously work towards some basic, updatable axioms. The world we are inhabiting is definitely a kingdom of hell environment. Whatever perspective or background that you have, you cannot deny the fact that in the year 2023, society was invaded, kidnapped, and killed, and barely anyone protested about it. In fact, the opposite happened. The aggressors and the kidnappers have been supported by massive global protests for years for their kidnappings, killings, and general terror. Again, only in a wretched environment such things happen, where alive humans are kidnapped and killed, and a campaign of lies and protest is organized to completely ignore alive kidnapped humans for 3 years and defend the aggressors. This is just a wretched kingdom of adults playing with people's lives, just like children play with toys. So we better stop playing games because alien intelligent alien intelligences or super intelligences are right around the corner, and we can be the victims of the same childish uh, gameplay with people's lives. So again, people gather around supporting manipulated terror assaults and kidnapping, but when it comes to a literal factory of human trafficking and terror, death, and killings such as Iran, no noise is made. Maybe the militaristic Islamic thought and idea police and its ideological invasion is far deeper in the Western body than I actually thought. I have to repeat again, this planet, throughout millennia, oscillates between a freedom-oriented or a control-oriented world, a free alignment or a forced alignment world. Uh, if we cannot establish a kingdom of heaven on time and time is running out, we will not survive extinction in the next decade, either from ourselves with nuclear weapons and Frankenstein AGI, or from the upcoming artificial superintelligent systems, which are by definition alien to us. Because a kingdom of heaven requires almost nothing objective to be fulfilled, no amount of money, no amount of military might, no amount of power can bring about a kingdom of heaven. Nothing, only a collective evolution, only a individualistic and collective evolution of mind and way of life is needed. And that is fundamentally nothing, just a change of ideas. Traditionally speaking, The second coming of Jesus Christ is portrayed as the re-entering of Jesus in this world's domain. But I am afraid that this is a misunderstanding because foremost, Jesus never left this universe for him to be able to come back. And secondly, it is the spirit of Jesus that has the potential to come back and restore and establish a kingdom of heaven. And that spirit is fundamentally is not an individual, but a collection of individuals. The spirit of second coming might be ignited by an individual, but its full force and effect lies in the collectivity of individuals that align towards a uh, kingdom of heaven, or simply put, a good environment, a better environment. So, simply put, what the butterfly is to the caterpillar is the exact analogy of what the second coming is to Jesus. The metamorphosis of Jesus is basically just a super Jesus. So here goes nothing. Uh, Domain